In this video and in this section of the course, we're going to be focusing on the squeeze play. So hopefully this is something that you already utilize in your game. But what we're going to focus on in this section is if you don't utilize this, then you're going to want to implement this in your game. And also, for those of you that do utilize the squeeze play in your game, I want to make sure that you're utilizing it properly. So let's talk about the squeeze play. So the squeeze play is a pre-flop aggression play. So what is it? It's a pre-flop aggressive light 3-bet against a loose open raiser and weak caller. So what's its goal? Well, it has two goals. The primary goal is to take down the pot uncontested pre-flop. And if that doesn't occur, try to get heads up against the weak initial caller with the weak capped range in position to that opponent. Now, if we think about it, the squeeze play, why is it called a squeeze play? Well, it's called a squeeze play because our goal is to squeeze out the initial raiser. So we're trying to attack opponents that initially raise that can't call a 3-bet profitably. So we're trying to squeeze them out of the hand because they don't know how the person that called them is going to react. Their relative position to them really sucks in this type of a situation because they don't know how they're going to react. They don't know if they're going to re-raise. They don't know if they're going to call. They don't know if they're going to get the pot odds or not to call. So it makes it hard for the initial raiser to call in this situation. And that's why the squeeze play is so great, because the initial caller is going to be out of position, ideally to you if you're in position. And they're going to be out of position pre-flop after we make the squeeze play to the initial caller because they don't know how they're going to react. So it makes it very hard for them to call. They'll be folding a lot if they have a weaker, looser opening range. And then once they're gone, we have our goal of taking them out of the hand. If the caller doesn't fold, then we get heads up against them, hopefully in position. And we know that when they call the initial raise and they call our 3-bet, they have a weak cap range. So it's going to put them at a disadvantage, not only from a positional disadvantage if we're in position, a card advantage because we know that they have a weak capped range, and also a skill disadvantage as well if we're targeting bad players. Okay, so let's look at the anatomy of the squeeze play, and I'm going to break it down some more. So what to look for in a squeeze play? Number one, look for a loose pre-flop open raiser who cannot call 3-bet profitably. So what do I mean by a loose pre-flop opener? Well, I'm talking about somebody that has a very high pre-flop raise HUD stat, or somebody that's opening a wider range in late position. So we don't want to attack somebody that has a tight opening range. We want to attack somebody that has a loose opening range. So it can be somebody that is in early position, but you need to look at somebody that's opening a wide range. So maybe they're a bad player and they're opening something like a 30% range under the gun or a middle position. Also, we want to look for people that are opening in the cutoff or the button. So we know that somebody opening in the cutoff and the button is going to be typically opening a wider range, so we can attack that as well. And then in addition to looking for a loose pre-flop opening raise from the initial raiser, we want to look for weak passive callers. And it doesn't matter if they're a calling station or if they play fit or fold and they're going to fold to something like 85 or 90% of 3-bets. If we're going to be in position, if we're going to have skill advantage, we're going to have card advantage, then it's fine if they're a calling station, but we're okay if they fold. The whole point is that the caller should be a weak caller. We don't want to attack somebody that's a caller that's going to be a good opponent, unless they are folding to a high percentage of 3-bets. If they're folding to a high percentage of 3-bets, then that's perfectly fine. But typically we want to look for somebody that has a weak capped range, and typically they're a weak opponent because we want to isolate them by squeezing the initial player out of the hand. And if they don't fold, then we're going to isolate and have them heads up. However, remember, the primary goal of the squeeze play is to try to take the money down uncontested pre-flop. So remember the two goals. If we don't accomplish that first goal of taking it down pre-flop, then the second goal is to play in position heads up against the weak opponent. Now, one thing to remember why the primary goal of taking it down pre-flop is that if you think about it, the initial opener commits 3 big blinds, the caller commits another 3 big blinds, and the small blind and the big blind post 1.5 big blinds. So there's 7.5 big blinds just sitting in the pot waiting for you to take. And that's a good way to pad your win rate without having to play hand post flop. Okay, so what can you raise with? Well, it's fairly simple. You're just going to take your standard value 3-betting range and just widen it a bit. And I just put an example of what it might look like, and let me actually pull up Equilab. So let me pull up Equilab. And let's say this is our standard 3-betting range. We just want to widen it up a bit. So we can include ace queen, we can include ace jack, pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket nines, pocket eights, maybe even down to pocket sevens, depending about how bad and how loose the initial raiser is and the caller is. And maybe even king queen. It all depends really on table dynamics and how loose of a squeeze you think you can get away with. So remember, this is in addition to your standard value 3-betting range. And so it's just loosening it up a bit. I mean, we're not going to go overboard. We're not going to start squeezing like a super high percentage ace 10 offsuit, king jack, something like this. I mean, something like that's just going to get out of hand, and you're going to lose your card advantage against your opponents. You want to keep it tighter, something like this, and maybe even like something like that. So it's really up to you. This is just a starting point recommendation for me, but like I said, it all comes down to table dynamics and what you think you can get away with. Okay, so who shouldn't you squeeze? You know who you should squeeze. You know the type of opponent you should be squeezing and the situations. Who should you not squeeze? Well, you should never squeeze a nit. So never squeeze somebody that has a really strong opening range. And typically that's somebody that's opening in early position, that's a tag, or it's a nit that's opening in any position, or a loose passive opponent that is raising pre-flop that has HUD stats where their pre-flop raise stat is something like a 12%. So anybody that is opening a strong range, you don't want to squeeze them because their strong range is going to play well against your like 3-bet. And if they call you, then you lose your card advantage. Yes, you still have your skill advantage. You may have positional advantage, but you lose your card advantage. So just be aware that you should not be squeezing against tight opponents in strong ranges. We want to target loose opponents in weak ranges. So what's next? Well, we're going to do some hand history review examples of some squeeze plays that I did. Now remember, this is a pretty basic concept, but I think it's underutilized in the micro-stakes games, especially with beginning poker players. And this course is all about dominating the micro-stakes and getting out of the micro-stakes and moving up to the higher micro-stakes. So this is a play that you want to include in your game, and you want to use it often. So look to use a squeeze play whenever there is an opportunity to do it. Some sessions you may not have an opportunity to do it. The last 3 or 4 sessions, I was looking actively to squeeze play people for my YouTube channel, but I didn't find a single situation where there was an optimal squeeze play situation where I thought I could get away with a squeeze play. And in something like 500 hands, I didn't do a single squeeze play. But I was 3-bet bluffing all over the place. I was isolation raising all over the place. I was check raise bluffing. I was doing all sorts of other crazy things for my YouTube channel for experimenting with bluffs. But I could not find a single situation to get away with a squeeze play. So remember, if the situation's not optimal, don't do it. But if the situation presents itself, definitely squeeze. So let's go ahead and in the next video, let's get started with our hand history examples for the squeeze play.